going to protect Christianity. And I can say that. I don't have to be politically correct, or we're going to protect it. You know? And I asked Jerry and I asked some of the folks, because I hear this is a major theme right here, but 2 Corinthians, right? 2 Corinthians 3:17, that's the whole ball game. Where the Spirit of the Lord, right? Where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. And here there is Liberty College, but Liberty University. But it is so true. You know, when you think, and that's really, is that the one? Is that the one you like? I think that's the one you like.
It was the mistake heard around the evangelical world. In 2016, Donald Trump attempted to cite a Bible verse following the advice of Tony Perkins during an appearance at Liberty University. The gaffe led the future president to harbor resentment toward the evangelical community for years, despite being the key voting bloc that propelled him to power. Joining us now to explain is staff writer for The Atlantic, Tim Alberta. He is the author of the new book entitled The Kingdom, the Power, and the Glory: American Evangelicals in an Age of Extremism. I'm fascinated and frightened by this issue, Tim. I'm really glad you wrote this book. First of all, tell us about the inspiration for the book.
Thanks, Mika. Thanks, Joe, for having me. Yes, the inspiration for the book, look, I grew up evangelical. My dad was a pastor in the Evangelical Presbyterian Church. That's my faith background. That's my faith community. And I grew up literally, physically inside the church. My mother was on the staff there as well. That was my home. It was my family. As I grew older, even though my relationship with Jesus never changed, I really started to feel my relationship with the church changing, and really became disillusioned with sort of institutional Christianity, so much of which in the American context was wrapped up in sort of nationalist ideals, political zealotry, political hypocrisy, and I sort of kept those concerns at bay for as long as I could. I really did kind of turn a blind eye to it, which in retrospect I feel sort of guilty about. But ultimately, when my dad died, it really forced me to re-examine some of this, in part because, as you teased earlier, I had some people basically confronting me at his funeral when I went home to Michigan, basically wanting to use his funeral to confront me and argue with me about Trump and about politics and all of that. And that was kind of the moment for me when I just realized that something had really, really gone wrong here, and maybe I should do something about it.
What happened at the funeral? You say someone passed you a note, or what was the confrontation?
Well, so as it happens, I had actually just written my first book that was about Trump's takeover of the Republican Party just before my dad died. That was the last time I saw my dad, was when the book came out. And so I was sort of in the crosshairs of right-wing media at the time, including Rush Limbaugh. So at the visitation for my dad when I went home, there were people coming up to me and saying, hey, Rush is ripping you on his show. You know, what's going on with you? Are you still a Christian? That sort of thing. And then it was sort of escalating from there to the point where the next day in my eulogy, I kind of let people have it a little bit and said, like, what are we doing here? Like, what, Rush Limbaugh, like, in the church? Like, is this who we are? And I thought it was finished at that point. And then I was handed a note after the eulogy, after we'd buried my dad, actually. And basically the note from an elder in the church, someone who was a close friend of my dad's, who I'd known since I was a little boy, basically said that I was a part of the deep state and that I was betraying the church, betraying the country, and that I should beg for forgiveness. And I have not begged for forgiveness. Obviously, I've chosen to go a different route here. But really, I'm, if anything, I'm just trying to help reclaim the church's true identity from, you know, this sort of hijacked, nationalized version that we're witnessing now.
Tim, such an extraordinary and terrible moment. I was lucky enough to receive an early copy of this. It's great. People should pick it up. Congrats to you. Talk to us a little bit, though. I mean, it seems that Trump is such an unlikely fit for this community. He sort of alluded to it himself in that clip we played a moment ago. But he was seen as sort of a means to an end. They were able to get what they wanted. But explain to us a little more about that, but also his hold on it, his persistent as being their choice, despite all that we know he has done since taking office.
Yeah, John, look, it's easy to forget now, but In 2015, early 2016, Trump was the last choice of all of these white evangelical voters in the Republican primary. And even after Trump had clinched the nomination, there was a tremendous amount of resistance to the point where Trump had to go to New York and meet with about 500 major evangelical ministers. And he had to have the endorsement of Jerry Falwell Jr. and Mike Huckabee and Franklin Graham and some of these other leading evangelical figures to really vouch for him. And then he chose Mike Pence, and then he released his Supreme Court list. All of this was aimed at assuaging the concerns of the evangelical movement. And basically what you saw in 2016 was a lot of these voters entered into a transactional relationship with Trump where they said, look, we don't trust this guy. He's not one of us. We know that he doesn't share our values. But if we give him our votes, then he will deliver us these policy victories. That transactional relationship has now morphed into something entirely different. Yeah. And I think the best explanation for this unflinching, unwavering support that we see, that you described, is for a lot of these folks, a lot of these voters, they truly believe at this point that the end is near, that America, as they've known it, is under attack, that the country is on its last legs, that the secular, leftist, government, deep state, whatever you want to call it, is coming for them, coming for their churches, coming for Christianity. And that sort of creates a permission structure for them to almost rent out Trump as a mercenary to protect Christianity, to fight for them in ways that no good Christian ever would. And so it's almost a little bit like when George W. Bush said that to protect the free market, that he had to first jettison free market principles with the bank bailout. This is sort of a similar thing where a lot of Christians say, look, in order to preserve Christian virtues in this country, maybe we first have to do away with Christian virtues.
There's something else in the Corinthians. The former president tried to kind of jumble that. That is, evil communications corrupts good manners, which is, which is what we see from the former president. I think what you're sort of getting at here is Christian nationalism, right? I haven't read the book yet, but I read the piece that you put out in the Atlantic about it that ended with the pastor who took over for your father, who was trying to fight the takeover of Trump in the church. You asked him what's happened to the evangelicals in America, and he said they love America too much. It's like is that what we're dealing with here? Is this what the evangelical, or at least for some evangelicals that are supporting Trump, morphed into Christian nationalism?
I think so. And listen, Christian nationalism is a loaded term, and it means different things to different people. So I think clarifying in this context what the definition is helpful. At the end of the day, if you are a follower of Jesus Christ, you are called to a citizenship in heaven, and you are called to be a part of the kingdom of God. And we are warned as Christians throughout Scripture, Old Testament and New Testament, prayers and epistles, all the way through. It's not ambiguous that your identity is rooted in heaven. Your identity is rooted in following Jesus. Unfortunately, I think this love of country, which can be healthy to a point, over-realized among some of these evangelical Christians, has sort of merged two kingdoms into one and has created this belief that somehow if America falls, then God himself is defeated. When, again, as Christians, we believe that Jesus triumphed over the grave, so there is no such thing as defeat. But when you begin to think of America as almost this covenant nation, that God has ordained us, God has blessed us, and you are fighting for God by fighting for America, that is Christian nationalism, and that is what has infected much of the church today.
Tim, growing up in the Southern Baptist Church, the golden rule was one of the earliest things they teach you. Do unto others as they would have you do upon them. What would Jesus do was just the catchphrase for the 90s. Kindness. That's why I'm just reeling a bit by your experience at your own father's funeral, being confronted by someone who was a close family friend and who you had known your whole life. That wasn't the golden rule in practice. That wasn't what would Jesus do. I don't think that Jesus would, harass a grieving son. It's almost just so, it's smaller than the big picture of what happened to evangelicals when it comes to, broader virtues and moral society. How has Trump changed just our basic kindness?
I think what we have to understand in the context of Trump and his relationship with evangelical voters is that in many ways, one of Trump's enduring legacies politically and otherwise, is going to be how he has sort of reconditioned the evangelical expectation of what a political leader should be. So, for example, when you look at Mike Pence's presidential campaign floundering the way that it has, I have this memory from a couple of summers ago when Donald Trump went to the Faith and Freedom Coalition gathering in Nashville, Ralph Reed's annual shindig, where Trump, for the first time publicly, really lit into Mike Pence and just let him have it in front of this ballroom full of a couple of thousand evangelicals who were Mike Pence's people, right? And the crowd went crazy, booing Pence, jeering him, cheering for Trump. And when you look at the collapse of Mike Pence's presidential campaign, I was with him at a rally once where he described himself as Rush Limbaugh on decaf, talking about his days in talk radio. And one of these Christian activists came up to me afterwards and said, "Decaf? We don't need decaf. Like, this country is about to collapse, and they are coming for the church. We don't need decaf. We need the real thing. We need all the caffeine we can get." So I think in some sense, as I said, Trump's enduring legacy with the church and with the evangelical vote is that he has conditioned them to expect a pugilism, an antagonism, a hostility that, of course, is completely abiblical and is antithetical to the teachings of Christ. And yet, you have this new standard set. And someone like Mike Pence, even someone like Ron DeSantis, they simply can't pass muster.